This week, Siskel and Ebert review Tom Selleck, Steve Guttenberg, and Ted Danson still bringing up baby in Three Men and a Little Lady. Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward star as Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. And Danny Glover leads a team of cops hunting and being hunted by Predator 2. It's all coming up next on Siskel and Ebert.
And Jack, were your rabbits? Were you guys doing the merry rap?
Tom Selleck, Ted Danson, and Steve Guttenberg are back caring now for a 5-year-old girl in the sequel, Three Men and a Little Lady. It's one of the new holiday movies we'll be reviewing this week on Siskel and Ebert. We'll also be talking with Sylvester Stallone about the tug-of-war in Hollywood right now between action pictures and romantic films. I'm Gene Siskel of the Chicago Tribune.
And I'm Roger Ebert of the Chicago Sun-Times. When I saw 3 Men and a Baby back in 1987, I have to admit I was pleasantly surprised. I knew the movie was going to be contrived and implausible, and it was, but what I didn't expect was that it would also be warm-hearted and charming. I liked it. But now they've assembled the same stars and made a sequel called 3 Men and a Little Lady, and this time they've pushed their luck a little too far. The situation is the same as before, 3 bachelors sharing the same apartment with a young woman and her lovable little daughter, who is the real reason they stay together.
Mary, don't you like your oatmeal?
It tastes like rubber.
It's supposed to taste like rubber.
What a crock.
Hey, where did you hear that expression?
What a crock.
The mother, again played by Nancy Travis, is growing uncomfortable with the strange living arrangement. She thinks it might be time for a change.
You can joke all you want, but the bottom line is Mary needs a more normal environment. She's very confused right now, and to be honest, so am I.
Enter the villain, a British theater director. Nancy Travis is really in love with Selleck, and he loves her, but when Selleck is too shy to propose, the British cad steps in with an offer of marriage, and that leads to big wedding plans at the director's British country estate, where Selleck, an architect, finds that the local schoolmistress has developed a big crush on him.
Not so splendid as your mighty erections, I imagine. Did I frighten you?
I was expecting Mary, that's all.
Ah, little Mary, yes. What a delightful, if somewhat, willful child. And she'll make an excellent Par 4 student.
She's going to your school?
Well, not immediately. No. But eventually.
I'm sorry, but she wouldn't like it.
What makes you say that?
Well, I just know, that's all. Boarding school is definitely not for her.
Tell me, are you always such a slave to your instincts?
The schoolmistress there is played by Fiona Shaw, and she is the one new spark of originality and comic inspiration in this movie. She and Tom Selleck have some really funny scenes together based on a mutual misunderstanding in that she thinks he loves her and he doesn't realize that she thinks that. But in between, all sorts of comic opportunities are lost in this movie. For example, when 4 adults live in such close quarters together, doesn't anything happen that's funnier than the woman burning the toast? This is basically material suitable for a farce, and it's been turned into a sentimental love story, all except for that supporting performance by Fiona Shaw. I wish the whole movie had taken its tone from her.
She's the only good thing in the movie. I was very disappointed in this film. I thought they should have stayed with the original idea, which is a little kid holding hostage a bunch of grown people. But the girl is boring here. They don't do anything with her. Why not make the raising of a toddler the comic material? Write that story. That might have been fun. Instead, we just have basically a Tom Selleck love story, and it's lame.
There's something else I have to say here, and I just as soon not say this, but I feel like I have to. I didn't like the actress who played the little girl.
No, me either.
She got on my nerves.
Yes, she's
Now,
annoying.
last week we reviewed this Home Alone with Macaulay Culkin.
Right.
He is a great little kid on the screen. He's charming, he's smart, he's got a lot of pep. This little girl just didn't do it for me, and so in a sense
let's get rough with her. Let's kill her career right off the get-go.
Why everybody was so nuts about her.
She's a brat. Let's kill her career. She'll end up owning
Wouldn't
the studio.
go that far,
Yeah,
Jane.
she'll end up owning our show. The point is, it's just a love story between her and Nancy Travis and Tom Selleck, and an ordinary
dumb
one.
otherwise, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, the review of our next film is more of a consumer's warning. This film is a cheap, sloppily made children's animated film called The Nutcracker Prince. The movie starts out pleasantly enough with the story of a little girl getting some toys for Christmas from her mysterious uncle Drosselmeyer.
All right, everyone.
Then the story shifts to a fantasy adventure for the girl with one of her toys, a nutcracker, coming alive.
Clara, you all right?
Yes, I'm fine. But I'm so small.
She's small, and so is the imagination of this whole project. I took a 4-year-old girl to the Nutcracker Prince, and like me, she was drawn into the story of the little girl and the Nutcracker doll. But what happened next shocked both of us. Suddenly, for about 15 minutes, we got a flashback. Remember this? Of how the real boy was turned into a nutcracker by the Mouse Queen. And that sequence is drawn in a totally different style, sort of like those old fractured fairy tales on TV. It's loud, vulgar, and it destroyed whatever we had been enjoying in this supposedly sweet Christmas story. So if you're looking for an animated film for your kids, The Rescuers Down Under is the one you should see, not The Nutcracker Prince. You know, a project like this really gives children's films a bad name. Parents get ripped off.
The animation is not good. It's
Cheap.
very basic and cheap. The dialogue is not funny. The story is not very amusing. And another thing that bothered me is the denouement of this film is a character being stabbed and falling to its death off the top of a tall Christmas tree.
Yeah, big mouse.
Why do children's stories have to end with the solution being that you kill somebody? Why can't a Christmas story end with people learning to love somebody? Why does anybody have to die?
It's a very cheap, mean-spirited project.
Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward rarely have worked together in the movies, but they're the co-stars of Mr. and Mrs. Bridge coming up later in the program. When we come back, though, an invisible alien from outer space is on the prowl in Predator 2.
Where is he? Oh, give me a coordinate. Where is he?
One of his kind stalked and eliminated an elite special forces crew in Central America. There were 2 survivors. Remarkable weaponry. That's right, Lieutenant. Otherworld life forms.
What Danny Glover has discovered there is that some kind of creature with superhuman strength seems to be on a killing spree in Los Angeles. And he's right, a big game hunter from outer space is on the loose in Predator 2. The original movie starred Arnold Schwarzenegger and the Predator in a one-on-one fight to the finish in the South American jungle, but Arnold isn't in this new movie, and the battle takes place in a different kind of jungle, Los Angeles, in the savage future world of 1997.
Whoever did this took out 4 men armed with machine guns by hand.
In any movie like this, there's always a federal official who seems to know everything and tries to warn the tough cop away from the case. This time, that role goes to Gary Busey.
Iwo Jima, Cambodia, Beirut, drawn by heat and conflict. He's on safari. Lions, the tigers, the bears. Oh my.
Trophies. That's the game, isn't it, Keys?
You're the lion. This is his jungle.
Once again this time, we learn little about the Predator except that he can be invisible, he sees by using infrared vision, and he'd rather kill than do anything else.
It's moving back against the wall. It's backing up. It's moving away from them.
You see them, Garber. Your boys have been made.
Sir, it's circling around behind them.
Get him out, Garber. They're walking into a trap. Get him out.
I don't know how much the original Predator cost to make, but Predator 2 is not a low-budget sequel. It's an expensive, high-tech movie with elaborate special effects, a lot of violence, and a surprising amount of really insulting foul language. As a high-tech thriller, it does its job, but it doesn't have much imagination. Here's a visitor from outer space, after all, and he has about the same taste and personality as Freddy Krueger or any other slasher villain. I wish there had been less violence in this movie and more of the vision of science fiction.
It's easy to compare the two films. The jungle was a much more interesting place in the original picture than this L.A. We've seen the L.A. graffiti-sprayed streets before. It's not particularly exciting. Second, Schwarzenegger is more compelling in an action story than Danny Glover is. Danny Glover's a fine actor, but you can't beat Schwarzenegger going against a creature like this. It was just a pale carbon copy. All it does is kill.
But there's
no
another
rivalry.
thing, Gene, that I mentioned before, and I'll come back to it again now. Danny Glover is very, very good in action pictures like Lethal Weapon. I think he's
because
fabulous.
He has a
in those roles.
human quality.
Here, he and the other actors are given dialogue that is designed only to explain and further the plot, and it's punctuated by the most vile language. I hardly ever mention bad language on the program because so many thrillers just use it routinely, but here, the ways that they find to insult women in particular reach a new low. I mean, who put this dialogue in, and who approved it?
It's not a pleasant film. Coming up next, Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward co-star in Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, an uptight WASP couple in Kansas City in the 30s and 40s.
For better or for worse, I turned out to be an attorney and not a poet.
Before we met, were you ever in love with anybody? Have you been in love since?
You're looking at a scene from Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, which marks Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward's first appearance together since that boring film Harry and Son back in 1984. This film is a lot better. In this new picture, they play a conservative, middle-class couple from Kansas City, and the movie covers more than a decade in their relationship, and it's a brittle marriage. He's stiff-necked, she wants him to relax. He's typically uptight when she gets him to take a second honeymoon to Paris in 1939, as they visit the can-can dancers at the Moulin Rouge, and talk about it later in their hotel room.
Aren't those girls something?
Yes. I'm planning to send a dozen roses to the 1/3 from the left.
The Bridges have 3 headstrong children. They are in constant conflict with their parents, including their sexually free daughter, Ruth, who is surprised by her father in the middle of the night.
You plan to marry the fellow?
Marry him? I hardly know him. He wanted me to go to a hotel. God, Daddy, times have changed. I mean, it was different when you and Mother were young.
Some things never change. Love, respect, human decency doesn't change.
The Bridges' son is an unfortunate chip off the old block, even more distant from his mother than his father is. And the tension is there when his mother bumps into him and the Hispanic woman he's dating.
Douglas, Dad is going to be home early this evening for a change. So Harriet is planning dinner for 6 sharp. I hope you won't be late.
The ultimate focus of the story is Mr. and Mrs. Bridge. She finally summons up enough courage to ask her husband a most important question.
Do you love me? Or do you?
If I didn't, I wouldn't be here.
Well, couldn't you tell me once in a while? Would that hurt you so very much?
Mr. and Mrs. Bridge is well made and earnest, but I think what recommends this movie the most is that it's not easy to figure out what's it about. The characters don't change. There's not a big happy ending. Rather, it's a lot like the fine movie Ordinary People, and it's almost documentary-like depiction of people who find it easier to follow rules than follow their hearts. It wasn't pleasant all the time, but I'm glad I met the Bridges.
I'm glad I did too. I think this is a wonderful movie. These 2 performances are so perfectly observed that you realize that what the movie is about is not what happens to them, and indeed the ending pretends it's going to be melodramatic and then it isn't. What the movie is saying is these are people just like a lot of other people at that time, and we want to look at them to see exactly what they were like, and it's very hard to forget those people.
And not just that time. We're not just talking the 30s and 40s. We're talking about now. There's a whole style of life, a very careful, measured life where people, well, I said it, they find it easier to follow rules. And she's in a sort of a tyranny situation. She's as culpable for their problems as he is. It takes her too long to approach him. She should be all over this guy in trying to break through his armor. And he could relax a little bit.
The key thing about these 2 performances to me is the fact that they're both so subtle, because both of these people have been ritualized into such a static relationship to each other that any change at all is like a cataclysm.
Yeah, you look at people sometimes and you wonder, how do they get rigid and uptight? This is almost a documentary approach.
Real good movie. Coming up next, Sylvester Stallone talks about leaving behind 15 years of action and adventure for a thing called love.
An economic argument going on about what people really want to see in the movies. Action pictures or romances. A lot of action proponents were startled this year by the success of such love stories as Pretty Woman and Ghost. And yet American action pictures still dominate the world market. Recently, I talked about this tug-of-war with Sylvester Stallone, whose Rocky series, in its best moments, combined both romance and action.
You're telling me that because films are being sold internationally,
right,
that they're becoming more action-oriented because who wants to watch subtitles or complexity of dialogue? Can you get specific?
Well, the world itself is becoming so numbed by everyday occurrences, and now, at least on an international market, they look to America, I think, more than any other country to supply this adrenaline shot, this heart-thumping action that it seems that we really have a stronghold on. So American films have become extremely motivated towards supplying their foreign counterparts with films that are quite limited on character and tremendous on technical expertise. And it's a giant market. It's made quite a few people very, very, very rich. And I don't see any end to that for a long time.
At the same time, what's the #1 film of the year domestically? Ghost.
Yeah.
Romance.
Yeah.
Pretty Woman. Romance. #2.
Yeah, that's great. No. See, that's what I was saying earlier about you never know in this business. Here it is. We're thinking about total this and, you know, thundering that and whatever. And all of a sudden, when we really get down to it, it's love. Because love is the only emotion that's worth a damn. The rest you can take and throw in the river. That is the one. Love and all its kissing cousins. Loyalty, kindness, dedication. That's it. The rest of them, that's what people strive for. That's what we want. Everybody wants it. So when you hook into it and you nail it, like with a ghost, or you nail it with a pretty woman, everyone's fantasy, it's going to go through the roof. Because that you hit, that's subconscious. You're right at the very bare essence of everyone's desire.
And the big surprise, of course, in the Rocky movies was that women went and they went for a love story, right?
Because Rocky is totally driven by love.
You don't want to kiss me back if you don't want. I don't want to kiss you.
Rocky is love, and when he hooks in with Adrian, that's it. That's when he came alive. That's when he blossomed. So that's why I think women and children have been drawn to Rocky films, because it's not a boxing film, and they were wise enough to pick that out in the beginning.
I think people want to see you fall in love.
Believe me, I certainly had enough practice, so I'm ready. God.
But I think you could write about a guy, you know, putting his heart out on the line as well as his chin.
Are you talking about, like, love comedy?
I'm talking about flat-out love story.
Oh, yeah, you bet.
So he's considering a love story. It may signal a turning point, actually, in movie making when an international action star like Stallone is open to making a romantic movie. Obviously, audiences want to see both action and romance. It's just that it's a whole lot harder to write a contemporary romance than it is to write an action picture. I think screenwriters have to love both men and women to write romances, and based on the films that we've seen over the last decade, I'd say that most male screenwriters, and they're mostly men, like men more than they like women.
Well, it's easier to write the action pictures, not necessarily easier to make it because of all of the amazing logistics involved in the special effects. But I think there's another issue here, Gene, and that is how well will Pretty Woman and Ghost export? How will it do? How will both of those pictures do overseas, where Hollywood gets more than 50 cents on every dollar of their big hits? Because the strength of action pictures has always been hardly any dialogue. Anybody can understand it. Ship them out to the non-English speaking markets and make a lot of money on them.
Well, I was surprised to learn that a love story, Children of a Lesser God, was a bigger hit in foreign than it was domestically here, and it was a substantial success here, but it did better. Now, maybe that's because with sign language, you know, the subtitles were easier, something like, I have no idea if that's the reason, but it does prove that a really good love story, and that was one, I think will work internationally.
Well, we're always going to have love pictures, and we're always going to have action pictures, and I just hope it gets to be a little bit more even, because the thing about a love story is, at least it's about people who in some way we can understand, and most of the action people these days in the action pictures don't seem to exist on any human plane that I've ever seen before. Thelonious Monk was one of the great figures of modern jazz and one of the most tragic, and our video pick this week tells the story of his life. It's coming up next. Now it's time for our weekly recommendation of a movie on home video that you might want to check out. And my recommendation this week is Thelonious Monk, Straight No Chaser, a behind-the-scenes look at one of the great innovators of modern jazz. But Thelonious Monk's private life was marred by a form of mental illness that caused him to withdraw from the world into a private shell, and that process is talked about here by his friends and family. This is the portrait of a great and lonely man who left behind a lot of unforgettable music. I recommend that you rent Thelonious Monk, Straight No Chaser. Now let's take another look at the movies we reviewed on this show. We both voted thumbs down on Three Men and a Little Lady. Nothing much funny in that one except for Fiona Shaw's hilarious performance. 2 more thumbs down, way down, for The Nutcracker Prince, a lackluster children's film. 2 more thumbs down for Predator 2, a high-tech action picture without much humor or invention. Finally, though, 2 enthusiastic thumbs up for Mr. and Mrs. Bridge, with closely observed performances by Paul Newman and Joanne Woodward, who are both wonderful in this film, and Mr. and Mrs. Bridge is the recommendation this week.
You know, when people hear a picture like this, they think, oh, it's going to be hard work to sit through and all that. I think that watching these 2 performers, it's a pleasure.
Not hard work for 1 second, because everything they do is interesting. That's it for this week. Next time we'll be back with reviews of more movies, including James Caan and Kathy Bates in the Stephen King thriller Misery, and Hidden Agenda, an espionage thriller set in Northern Ireland. That's next week, and until then, the balcony is closed.